So I'm going to be ruthless and shut you up or keep you on topic, okay? Okay, let's start with the far away table. With your novel idea or difficult question. And you've 1 minute.
So, we had a discussion about long-term planning for research in the health system, and the fact that the decision has been made to form 6 hospital groups which involve university partners and health systems. I think one of the ways we could have a win in this area, and the group came up with this idea, was if we had a prioritization of research as a focus of those hospital groups.
Okay, that's excellent. And half a minute. Brilliant. Thank you very much. We'll go to this table back here now.
Hi, my name is Derek Mitchell. I'm coming from JPND, which is an EU funding organisation for neurodegenerative diseases. We had a fairly good discussion considering the expertise that's around the table, and the main question that we've come up with is can new ICT or e-health technologies be used to develop communities or share information around and ultimately to develop specific research questions? So the whole issue is that information deficits is a particular challenge for many patient organisations, and that there are a lot of new technologies out there that could be harnessed to enable them to share information and develop research questions for particular conditions.
Okay, that's great. Derek, thanks a million. Go to this group here.
Hi, I'm Claire Kelly, coming from
Hello.
Hello.
If you hold it close.
Hello. There. Okay. Claire Kelly, Muscular Dystrophy Ireland. We had 2 questions. The first one is, how do we include basic biomedical research on the agenda given the current funding landscape? Basically, the focus at the moment is on translation, with a lot of the basic research being lost. And the second question is, how do we include smaller research endeavours, whether they be smaller organisations or charities or patient groups or early stage researchers?
Okay. Carrie, you broke the rules, but you did it in a minute, so I don't mind. That's allowed. Okay, we go to the panel. Any thoughts on any of those 3 questions in relation? Okay.
I'll just take Derek's question. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. On the new ICT tech side of things, I think this is a yawning gap in the system at the moment. For a long time we've said, well, the health identifier is coming, that's going to solve all the problems. I think it will help when it's eventually operationalised. But actually there is a need to develop, and at not great cost, a piece of infrastructure that will allow us to link existing data sets. I was only talking to some people about this earlier, which would be quite an efficient use of registries, administrative data sets, clinic stuff that's been collected on projects. It can be done actually, which, believe it or not, under the Statistics Act by the CSO. So a partnership with the CSO is something we're certainly looking into to see if we can develop in terms of the HRB to give us some relatively quick wins in this space, because we could get enormous value out of data that has already been collected. And it's something as part of the next HRB strategy, but I would like to see it more nationally explored, because I think we'd get, it's one of those, can I use it, a win-win cliche please, but I think it is something we could get a lot of value from, and I think it will drive more precise research questions and findings accurate for policy.
And you don't actually need the health identifier.
We may not, that was kind of the point I made. I think it will help in the longer term. We could actually move in advance of it. I'm not keen that we necessarily wait around.
And how long could you do, how quickly could you do some of that linking without the identifier?
I think if the right infrastructure is in place, within a year we could actually start to grow this. There's certain services, we've developed a paper, we want to bring it into the Department of Health at the moment. The critical piece being the legislation and some of the expertise exists in the CSO. So we don't have to go out and start everything from scratch. And I think a phrase I often use, let's try it and make the baby walk before we run, and put this to test.
Okay, that's great. Deborah, Avril.
Just a small additional point on that. Is this working?
Yeah.
No.
Up close.
Yeah,
just a small additional point on that to say, as well as looking to the national agenda, for many disease areas, in particular the rare diseases, looking internationally is so important as well. And I think e-health is going to be critical in that. Patient registries, of course, and for instance with many of the rare diseases we don't know the natural history, and until you know the natural history you don't know what questions you need to address fully, and so that's going to be really important.
So that's around the need for the basic medical research.
And sorry, that was more around e-health and how it can support a research agenda.
Anyone else on the panel have any thoughts on any of them? Graham, I don't want to put you in the spotlight, but given...
Basic biomed?
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd sure should be not to address that. So I think it was this table asked the question. I think there is a gap opening up. I'm going to be quite candid about it. I'll speak selfishly for a moment from the perspective of the HRB, and then I will speak more at a general level nationally. Some budgets won't extend to it. My own and the HRB for the moment, given what we do. Long term, the HRB's work needs basic biomedical research. That's unquestionable in my view. And I would like the national conversation to identify what is the portion of the national spend that should be invested. Let's stop arguing about the concept, but get to the point of what is acceptable by international standards, and then at national level decide what needs to be invested, and then we'll decide who does it after that. Unfortunately, the argument at the moment is various constituencies are taking very extreme positions, if I can put it that way, and I think it's quite unhelpful. Is it 10%? Is it 20%? I'd like to identify what that is, and then whether it becomes SFI's responsibility. If someone wants to give me extra budget, we'll certainly go into it. But we had an international panel on the Health Research Board just late last year who acknowledged that pragmatic terms, it's too far for the HRB to extend with its current resources, but that we need to advocate for it and effectively lobby for it, because it is essential for long term.
Okay, if no one else on the panel is dying to respond, I think the group Table 1's proposal is a really good one, and hopefully something that, like everything that's been said at the table, is being recorded and documented by Jude and Shannon here. So it's not that it'll be lost, and it'll be for the forum to pursue those ideas. So I think that's a particularly useful one. Okay, I'm going to go back to the tables, to this table here.
Hi, I'm Oliver O'Connor. I'm Chief Executive of the Irish Pharmaceutical Healthcare Association, and I'm here to represent this table. We were very, very shy, so nobody will speak at the table, and I drew the short straw. We sort of discussed just a couple of things. The question, some of the question has been answered already, but really it was the question of the policy, the priority, as if it was a single thing. But we wanted to say we've recognised that there's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of diversity in what research is aimed at. Some of it is aimed at clinical standards, clinical practice, some of it is aimed at general policy, some of it is aimed at sectoral policy, meeting unmet need and so on and so forth in health services. Some of it is aimed at basic science and development, basic science research. And recognising that diversity, which is always going to be there. I suppose if I was to sum up our discussion, it would be, how do you recognise and allow for the ferment, the diversity, and not crowd things out by having a single policy on prioritisation. And that question arose because there's a certain sense that policy, as it operates now, has done a bit of crowding out and has skewed funding away from biomedical research. So it's that diversity in unity type of question.
Okay, thanks very much, Oliver. You might pass the mic to the next table here.
Good morning, my name is Robert O'Connor. I'm head of research for the Irish Cancer Society. I guess we try to look at it in a where do we start kind of way, and one of the questions that came up was how do we challenge and or improve public perception of health research? We've very poor culture of understanding of health research in Ireland that feeds into the whole sustainability, the scope, how much resources get put in, and how those resources are going to be sustainable in the longer term. If our community believes what we do is important, they should put money into it. We hope they will. And then we can start scoping out if we know how much resource we're going to have into the future. So we have a communication job, and how do we impact that communication, that communication job?
And Robert, is it communicating the need for the research, or the findings of the research?
Particularly the need, I suppose, but it's all aspects. We don't effectively communicate. Some people are starting to do it better now, but we don't effectively communicate to our community. We were talking about what did we think might happen if we went outside to Joe Public on the street today and asked him, name a famous scientist, name an important aspect of research that's impacting their life in terms of health, and we think they would be challenged to do so. And in other countries, they would point to the names of institutions, leaders in the field, major pharma companies, or other impacts of research, and we have those things here, but we're not communicating.
Okay, right, very good. We go to that back table there.
Hello again. Our difficult question was, how can we ensure that research priorities are based on what our people need in order to be as healthy as possible, and not unduly influenced by availability of funding or commercial interest? And our idea was develop a research governance framework at national level which would support the coordination of research priorities across research in the health service, university and other sectors, including patient organisations.
Okay, what did you call that? That's your recommendation? The
Research governance framework.
Okay. Okay, the panel, I might go to Richard in terms of if you have any thoughts on the first question there from Oliver in terms of how you balance that diversity without crowding out necessary or essential research. The last one. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello? Can you hear me now?
No.
No? Yeah. Okay. Yes, sorry, these microphones seem to be giving a lot of trouble.
Can you hear?
I suppose in terms of our own experience...
No, can't hear. Can we, where's the microphone for the table? You won't roar, Richard, will you?
Well, yes, of course, yeah. Hello? Yes. In terms of our own experience, there's no easy answer to that question, I suppose, this idea of accommodating diversity. You can imagine that within the agri-food sector, across the agri-food sector and across right from the production, the primary production side, which is predominantly farmers, and even within farmers there's all the various different sectoral areas or sub-sectoral areas ranging from dairy to beef to cereals and what have you, and you've got various different representative organisations who are lobbying for their particular interests. Likewise at the processing side, the same is true, and so on. So I mean, what we would have done, I think, in terms of engaging with those bodies would be to work through their representative organisations. We can't obviously reach out to all of the farmers, all of the farming community, or indeed to all of the SMEs that exist and indeed big companies that exist in the food processing sector. But we would be aware of the various different sort of representative bodies that exist that represent the interests of all of those players. And I suppose in terms of an overarching strategy, I mentioned earlier the Food Harvest 2020 strategy that was put together, and that was put together by the industry. I mean, the department and the minister and so on facilitated it, but it was put together by the industry, and inherent in that was the recognition that research was a cross-cutting issue. So we didn't deal with research at the end of the chapter 10 or whatever. It was recognised that research was a component of delivering on the various different objectives and targets and so on that are built into the strategy right across the various different pieces of the jigsaw, if you like. And you know, for example, I mean, in overarching terms, we're talking about competitiveness, we're talking about sustainability, particularly environmental sustainability, and obviously profitability for all of the actors in the process. But you know, it was recognised that research had a role to play with respect to realising those opportunities and dealing with the challenges. And in terms of putting together the strategy, all of the various representative bodies of the various different subsectors were included in that. And at the end of the day, the document became a reality. and that then became the overarching piece for the research agenda that was developed on foot of that. So I mean, it's just, I suppose, inclusiveness and trying to, and you know, at some stage somebody has to draw to make a decision as to what goes in and what doesn't go in, and all in terms of the document I referred to earlier on the 2 priority areas. There was 3 pieces to that particular development: the funding bodies who were active in that particular space through the working group. Secondly, then the stakeholder engagement surveys that we carried out, and thirdly, then a committee which basically sat and reality checked all of the various raw data that came forward and tried to reconcile and come up with the priorities that have eventually been emerged.
Okay, maybe, I don't know, James, if you want to comment on that, I guess with your broader ESRI hat on in terms of the crowding out of some aspects of research in the health area.
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking say from the growing up in Ireland perspective, certainly it is the case, you know, as I said, in terms of the broad consultative process that we carry out, we do get you know, sort of a huge range of inputs, if you like, from specialists in a whole range of different areas. And unfortunately, you know, it's simply the case that we do not have the time in a study like Growing Up in Ireland and a lot of other social science-based studies to be, you know, to be as inclusive as we would like. I mean, one area which I would point to where I think there is, if you like, a deficit in Growing Up in Ireland is in terms of dental health. But you know, it's just a topic which is very, very difficult to incorporate in that sort of survey-based research. So I mean, decisions unfortunately have to be made. As I said, we do have a set of criteria in terms of acceptability to the families and so forth, and we do take enough of the families' time as you know, as it stands at the moment. So we try to be as inclusive as possible, but we recognise that there are limitations on that, I'm afraid.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, James, just in the interest of time. Does Avril or Graham want to respond to the other questions? One from here around communicating, and then the other around how health needs can be matched by funding.
I'd like to respond to Robert's one on the sort of how do we improve the image and the level of engagement, etc. I think it's starting to grow here. We heard reference earlier to PPI, public patient involvement. I'm using the involved sort of UK definition there, which is the broadest definition. And I think by factoring that into our research increasingly over the next number of years, and it is part of the HRB plan specifically to do so, it's already, we put it into our calls last year to ask investigators to describe their plans for PPI, but that obviously needs to extend to the evaluation piece, and then later, I think when we get more sophisticated, to the actual setting of research questions. Now, if people are involved all that journey, I think endemically, that will result in people being engaged and involved, rather than us simply trying to go out and put out press releases or sponsor a TV program or something like that. It actually is integrated into the research process much more than it is today, because today it's very much researcher here, stakeholder over there. That's, you know, longer term, I think that will deliver that.
Just on that as well, yeah, I think it's so important. I think the medical research charities know that very well, because that's our bread and butter, selling the story of research, and I think it has to be done very much on an ongoing basis and in innovative ways, not just falling back on talking about research as something in the future, but talking about it something in the here and now. Like, you wouldn't have received that diagnosis had the research not underpinned it. And I think there's probably an important role for the Medical Research Charities Group, the MRCG, in that, and it's something that we've been talking about. Budget, as ever, is the issue. If anybody has any ideas as to how to help with that. The MRCG did do a piece of market research going back some years now, asking the public if they were going to support a research charity, would they rather support patient care or research? And a third said research, which I think is quite positive actually, and something that can be built on.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Okay, over to the last three groups.
You want to start, Paul? My name is Kevin Bland from the Institute of Public Health. The panel had noted that we have established in the state early year and later year cohort studies, which were really sort of valuable. But there's a big gap in the middle years. And our table spent a lot of time talking about why this was come about and how we might sort of fill that gap. For example, large-scale population health status monitoring and surveillance are really important for public health, population health planning and development. We have, at the moment, a commitment to do 3 cross-sectional surveys to support health, which is the state's public health framework. But to be honest with you, I'm not really sure that those are going to continue in the future. So our questions to the panel are, first, in the short term, how do we gather support to make sure that those cross-sectional surveys in middle years are continued and become an important part of the information infrastructure on the island? And secondly, in the longer term, how do we build up the longitudinal aspect of those middle years so that we can get a true picture of the life course of health and well-being at a population level?
Okay, that's great. Could you just pass it to this table here, please?
Doug Beaton from the HSC. To some degree, the point we're going to make may have been covered, but we certainly wanted to strongly emphasise the importance of trebling our efforts around the patient and public involvement piece in terms of almost a participative democracy process, since if you're talking about publicly funded research, they've all paid into the fund on the research piece. So very struck by what you were saying, Avril, in terms of the DEBRA piece, that the public assisted in a process can fully appreciate how to help come to decisions about what to prioritise and what to spend time and energy on, and that balance between suffering in the near term and long-term cure, and that they should be involved in that dialogue in a very substantive way. So that would be, I suppose, our question is how to achieve that in the relatively near term is an important contribution. Slightly personally speaking, but certainly taking out messages that we heard, there seems to be an idea which we should pursue, which is around having some kind of integrated view about where are we investing the relative levels of money and what kind of payback have we had. It's almost like a kind of a rolled up, model of the level of payback we've been achieving. Now you have to try and somehow measure the value in order to make that kind of judgment, but I think that we should try and do that collectively and see what we can learn from that in terms of what we've done in the past, and it might tell us what we should pay attention to in the future.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Can you pass it to our women's table here in the corner?
Hi, I'm Mara Downs from the MRC. Most of us at this table represented charities, so I must apologise that we didn't disperse enough.
You don't need to apologise.
Our feedback really was that there was a need to identify the potential impact of the research at the prioritisation stage, and that consideration should be given to how it's going to be implemented and the resources required for implementation. And this really ties in with the lack of ownership in the HSC and no one body or person to talk to about implementation of findings. And then we also discussed, as has already been mentioned, the implementation of PPI, that this needs also to be considered at prioritisation stage.
Okay, that's great, Mary. I'm going to go back to the panel. Is there anyone from the floor who has a burning desire to talk very briefly, or can we go back to the panel? Anyone feeling? No. Okay, great. So we're going to go back to the panel, and then you're going to go on your coffee break. So we're nearly there. Anyone want to start?
So just on the PPI topic, is this on? It's how do we improve the levels of PPI? I think it's a really difficult thing, actually. It's not necessarily very obvious as to how you engage patients and the public in research, and I think a lot of people are very willing but don't know exactly how to do that. And following on from our last forum meeting, actually, the steering group for the Irish Health Research Forum put together a document on how you approach that, and as Philip said, talking about a spectrum of the ways that you can do it. So without going into the detail here, you have to have a really sort of broad mindset. Sometimes it's just about informing, and if you inform people, they engage. And sometimes it's about going to the literature, the scientific literature, and looking at, say, pieces of qualitative research where patients have actually said what's important to them and drawing on that. And sometimes it's involving patients, as the HRB are now doing, in the decision making about which project to fund. So yeah, there's so many ways that you can do it, and I would just encourage you to read that that paper that the forum have produced.
Okay, maybe Richard, yep.
Yes.
I think this.
Yes. Hello. Can I be heard?
No. Maybe this one. Technology
Hello,
fail.
yes. Just on the impact thing, I just wanted to mention. Obviously, impact is very important, and certainly from a funder's point of view, and this is not unique to ourselves, but it's a common piece for all the different funding bodies. It's an issue that we've been particularly energised about over the last few years, I think, in particular. And I guess all of us at the level of making funding decisions in terms of the evaluations that we carry out when we receive applications that have means and ways of ensuring that there is that there are criteria to evaluate the likelihood of an impact of a particular application, and certainly we're no different in that regard. We have those criteria and we implement them very, very strongly. At the agenda setting stage, it's more difficult, but in that process that I referred to earlier, that document that I mentioned over there, we did make an attempt to challenge the ideas that came forward, that were being put forward by the various different bodies. And in fact, in the 8 categories, all of the priorities have been identified under 8 categories. And in those categories, you will see that they've been laid out in a particular manner whereby the expected impact is up there at the very beginning. So the people who are putting forward in the various different committees and so on that were involved in the process had to, in the first instance, challenge the ideas for their impact or their likely impact, and also the expected benefits that would accrue. So that was an attempt, I suppose, at trying to build impact into the agenda setting stage, or at that early stage. It's not easy to do. We didn't use any, I suppose, hard and fast statistical or metric ways of evaluating it, but we did do a qualitative process at least to try and do that.
James, any thoughts on the point brought up by Kevin in relation to the middle years cohort study? Or?
Yeah, just in terms of that sort of gap in the middle, well, I mean, truthfully, I don't have an answer to it, but the one thing I'd say is I think that the increasing recognition of the importance of adopting the life course perspective that you mentioned would hopefully perhaps convince funders that more money, more budget, more research budgets, if you like, should be put into that area. It's certainly the case that if you look at the two studies, the 2 longitudinal studies, the core studies you have in this country at the moment, the Growing Up in Ireland and the Tilda study, that you can see that there are issues coming out in both studies which sort of speak to the importance of taking that life course perspective. It would be, looking back, Sarah mentioned the 1946 study in her introduction, the 46 study in Britain, which was started way back when. It was started as a child cohort study, and it is still continuing today, and it has morphed into an aging study, obviously, at some point along the way. Now, I'm not suggesting that, say the Growing Up in Ireland study would fill those middle years in that way, if you like, okay? But, be it through cross-sectional surveys in the immediate term, which are cheaper and have lower budgets anyway. But I do think there's a very definite need. I agree with you. There is a need for trying to fill that middle year, those middle years, with some sort of life course study or longitudinal study.
Okay, great. I'm going to give the last word to Graham, either in relation to the mid-years cohort, but also the bigger prioritisation agenda setting issue.
Read my mind. I'd like to link that to the larger research endeavour, because I think over the last 6 or 7 years there has been a creep towards short-termism in research and development investment, and it's going to make it very difficult to persuade additional investment into things like a brand new longitudinal study that we need to commit to for 20, 30, 40 years. But it needs to happen, and I'm using that as a lightning rod for persuading the system here, in effect, that in the end research investment is a longer term game, and that we need to take that view of it. In general, it is not something that produces an impact typically in a 3 or 4 year time frame. You will get some.
Not in an election cycle.
Not within an election cycle, exactly. And many of the benefits we're getting from some of the research today were started 10 and 15 and 20 years ago. And please, let's not confuse that with the preaching for basic research only. It is valid in that space, but more generally for research and development, building the infrastructure, building capability in the people that we train, etc. We have to take a longer term view, and that must inculcate into the prioritisation mechanism. Prioritisation shouldn't be about getting the most from our resources within the next 5-year window, for example. Sermon over.
I think that's a good note to end on. I want to thank all the panellists, Richard, James, Avril, and Graham, and to thank you, all the participants, for participating and your prompt timekeeping. Thank you very much. We're 5 minutes late for the coffee break. You've 15 minutes for coffee, and then you're back at 11:20 for the keynote address. I think you're going to be polled during the coffee break, isn't it? Or there's a polling question up here, and they're keen for you to respond to that. So polling and coffee, and back in 15 minutes, okay? Thank you very much.